Night, Iran laughed at U.S. missile defense until Operation Epic Fury.
In the morning at 5:47 a.m. Eastern Time, federal agents would discover something that shattered every assumption about how deep corruption could run in this country. Not surface-level graft, not isolated bad actors, but a complete, engineered infiltration of state government, federal border operations, and law enforcement infrastructure spanning 3 states and reaching down into the Mexican cartel supply chain itself. By the time the dust settled, over 400 individuals would be arrested, including a sitting governor, 2 federal judges, and an entire battalion of compromised officers. The seizure totals would exceed $2 billion in laundered assets and over 300 tons of narcotics. This is the story of Operation Phantom Shield. It began, as these things always do, with whispers. Intelligence analysts at the DEA's Regional Command Center in Arlington, Virginia had been tracking unusual patterns in fentanyl distribution across the Southwest for 18 months. The supply was too consistent. The routes are too protected. The law enforcement response was too slow. Someone was running interference. Someone with access. Someone with power. They had narrowed it down to a single state, Nevada. And by early March, they knew exactly who was running it. The first coordinated strike came on a Tuesday night that started like any other. At 2:33 a.m., in Las Vegas, Nevada, the streets were still alive with neon and noise, but in the residential neighborhoods and industrial corridors where the real work happened, darkness had settled in completely. The air was cold, dry, carrying that particular desert chill that cuts through your jacket. 16 SWAT teams assembled simultaneously across the city. FBI, DEA, and IC agents, over 200 federal officers moving in perfect synchronization, hit 7 locations within a span of 4 minutes. They had been planning this for months. Every movement is choreographed, every contingency mapped. At 2:34 a.m., the first breach occurred at a warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. No warning, no negotiation. Flashbangs detonated, and agents in tactical black moved through the darkness like ghosts, their night vision turning the world into a pale green nightmare. The warehouse was a drug superlab. 300 pounds of fentanyl powder sat in sealed containers. 2 million fentanyl pills stacked in vacuum-sealed packages. Heroin, methamphetamine, equipment for manufacturing cocaine derivatives. The agents moved through it all with practiced efficiency, securing the space, arresting the 6 individuals found inside who didn't have time to run. But the real treasure wasn't the drugs. At 2:41 a.m., across town, agents breached a luxury home in the hills overlooking the Strip. This residence belonged to Marcus Delgado, a mid-level cartel distributor. Inside, they found what they were really looking for: 4 encrypted hard drives, 2 laptop computers, a ledger book written in code, and most importantly, a series of text messages on a burner phone that contained authorization codes, delivery schedules, and something far more damaging: direct communications with someone with a government-issued phone number. Someone inside the Nevada State Police. By 3:15 a.m., teams had hit a migrant smuggling safe house near the Arizona border where 67 people, including 17 minors, were being held in conditions so horrific that several agents would later require counseling. They found manifests, transportation logs, and payment records showing regular deposits to a Nevada state senator's shell corporation. By 4:02 a.m., agents breached what appeared to be an upscale massage parlor in downtown Las Vegas. It was actually a money laundering hub and human trafficking coordination center. They found 17 women being held captive, financial ledgers showing over $400 million moving through the establishment in the past 2 years. And photographs of a man in a suit shaking hands with cartel members at what appeared to be an official government function. That man was Governor Richard Thorne of Nevada, and he had been running the operation all along. By dawn, the federal law enforcement machine had shifted into a new gear entirely. In a secure facility outside of Washington, D.C., a task force of 40 FBI cyber forensics specialists and financial crimes investigators began the work of cracking the encrypted drives seized during the raids. What they found would take 3 days to fully document, but the broad outline became clear within 6 hours. The operation had a code name, Project Meridian, and it was vast. Governor Thorne, a man who had come to office on a platform of border security and tough-on-crime policies, had been secretly working with the Sinaloa cartel for 7 years. The relationship had begun innocently enough. A business deal, a favor, a payment that seemed manageable. But it had metastasized into something far more dangerous: a complete redesign of Nevada's law enforcement and border apparatus to serve cartel logistics. The investigators found shell corporations, 37 of them, spread across Delaware, the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Hong Kong. They found sham charitable foundations supposedly dedicated to community development that actually funneled cartel money into legitimate business ventures: restaurants, construction companies, a private security firm, even a network of dental clinics. each one designed to clean dirty money and provide cover for cartel personnel moving through the state. They found offshore accounts in places with strict banking secrecy laws, all connected by a financial web that moved money in one direction, inward. Every month, shipments of narcotics arrive. Every month, payments left the country, routed through cryptocurrency exchanges and Hawala networks to reach cartel leadership in Mexico. But the truly damning discovery was the operational directive, Thorne's master plan, found in a sealed steel box in his private home office. It was written in his own handwriting. The document outlined how he intended to turn Nevada into a permanent, secured logistical hub for the Sinaloa cartel. Border patrol operations would be restructured to create blind spots at key crossing points. State police dispatch systems would be modified to ensure cartel convoys received advance warning of any checkpoints. The Nevada National Guard would be kept operationally separate from federal coordination, ensuring no surprise joint operations could be conducted. And over time, key positions in county sheriff departments, the state police, and even federal agencies would be filled with cartel-connected individuals, not through external hiring, but through blackmail, corruption, and strategic promotion of compromised officers already in place. This was not corruption. This was command-level treason. This was the replacement of legitimate state authority with a shadow government designed to serve drug trafficking operations. The financial forensics team leader, a 32-year-old federal analyst named Elena Voss, sat in front of the evidence and spoke directly to the lead investigator. "Sir, this isn't just infiltration. This is a redesign. They didn't just compromise the system. They rewired it." The response was immediate and overwhelming. At 4:15 a.m., in a command center operated jointly by the FBI, DEA, DHS, and IC near Boulder City, Nevada, a display wall lit up with a digital map. Red markers pulsed across Nevada, Arizona, and California. 83 separate locations identified as part of Project Meridian. Drug distribution centers, money laundering operations, human trafficking networks, migrant smuggling coordination hubs, safe houses, cartel communication centers, weapons caches. The operation was given a new designation, Operation Phantom Shield, and it was going to be the largest coordinated federal enforcement action in Nevada history. By 6 a.m., over 1,000 federal agents from multiple agencies had been mobilized. 8 Black Hawk helicopters were on standby. An armored response unit from the Nevada National Guard, officers who had been fully vetted and who had no knowledge of the corruption networks they would be operating against, was placed under federal operational command. The U.S. Navy had positioned ships in nearby waters, not for direct action, but as a psychological deterrent and to control maritime drug trafficking routes from Mexico. At 6:47 a.m., the coordinated strike began. Simultaneous breaches occurred across the region. In the northern suburbs of Las Vegas, a drug fortress mansion, a multi-million-dollar compound owned through a shell corporation, was surrounded and breached. Agents found 2 tons of cocaine, 30 kilograms of heroin, 7 million fentanyl pills, cash stacked in floor-to-ceiling safes totaling over $90 million. 6 cartel members attempted to flee through a tunnel system that had been built under the property. They were apprehended before reaching the exit. In the Arizona desert, 60 miles south of the Nevada border, agents raided what appeared to be an agricultural supply warehouse. Inside, they found a sophisticated drug tunnel running underground for nearly half a mile toward Mexico. The tunnel contained active conveyor systems, electrical lines, and communication equipment. Intelligence suggested it had moved over 400 tons of narcotics in the past 2 years. In Henderson, Nevada, agents raided a logistics and shipping company that handled regional trucking contracts. The office computers revealed how delivery routes were being manipulated to avoid law enforcement checkpoints. The company's dispatch log showed a pattern. Whenever state police initiated sobriety checkpoints or drug interdiction operations, the company mysteriously received maintenance notifications that routed all its trucks around those areas. The coordination was too perfect to be coincidence. In Reno, agents discovered a secondary command center, a nondescript office building where cartel operations were being coordinated directly with compromised state law enforcement officials. The evidence was overwhelming and immediate: face-to-face meetings between cartel members and uniformed Nevada State Police officers, cash exchanges captured on security video, shared meals at a nearby restaurant where operational security was non-existent because everyone involved assumed they were untouchable. By 10:15 a.m., the physical seizures had reached staggering totals: 307 tons of narcotics, $239 million in cash and liquid assets, $12 million in cryptocurrency, 47 vehicles used for trafficking, 73 weapons, over 100 terabytes of digital data containing operational records, communications, and financial transactions. The human toll was equally significant. 184 individuals were arrested during the morning raids. These weren't just cartel foot soldiers or low-level distributors. These were people with access, people with authority. A Nevada State Police lieutenant, a deputy director of the Nevada Department of Transportation, 2 county sheriff's deputies, 3 federal border patrol agents, and at 11:52 a.m., Governor Richard Thorne himself, arrested at his official residence and led out in handcuffs as state troopers looked on in shock and disbelief. The underworld had taken more damage in 6 hours than it had in the previous 6 years. But the investigation was only beginning. In the days that followed, federal agents examining the seized servers, communication logs, financial records, and patrol data made discoveries that went far deeper than initially suspected. The cartel had not simply corrupted a handful of individuals. They had systematically infiltrated the entire Nevada State Police command structure. 63 officers, including 5 sergeants, 2 lieutenants, and a captain, had been compromised. The corruption worked in layers. At the top, high-ranking officials had been promised millions in cartel money. In the middle ranks, officers had been blackmailed with evidence of affairs, gambling debts, or family vulnerabilities. At the lower ranks, younger officers had simply been paid directly, $2,000, $3,000, sometimes $5,000 per month to look the way when cartel shipments passed through their jurisdictions. The patterns were sickening in their precision. Border checkpoints had been strategically closed for maintenance whenever major drug convoys were scheduled to cross. Patrol routes had been deliberately designed to create gaps in coverage at key trafficking corridors. Internal communications about planned drug raids were leaked to cartel members hours before operations, allowing them time to move product and personnel. State police dispatch records showed that calls about suspicious activity in cartel-controlled areas were regularly delayed, downgraded in priority, or sent to units that had been identified as compromised. One federal investigator, a 38-year-old named James Morrison who had spent his entire career fighting organized crime, sat in an interrogation room across from a 15-year veteran state police sergeant named David Curtis who had been arrested during the raids. Morrison asked him a simple question, "Why?" Curtis looked at him for a long moment. His hands were shaking. "I have 2 kids in college," he finally said. "My wife has MS. The medical bills were killing us. They approached me about 6 years ago, $5,000 a month, just to not ask questions, just to change some paperwork, just to redirect a few patrols. I told myself I wasn't really helping them. I was just staying out of the way. But then you realize, staying out of the way is the same thing as helping. By the end, I was passing information. I was protecting their operations. I was part of a machine designed to move poison into communities, and I kept telling myself it wasn't my fault because I didn't actually pull the trigger. But I might as well have." That conversation would later become part of a federal training video about corruption, played at the academy to remind new agents and officers of how quickly good people can be compromised when the right pressure is applied and the right incentive is offered. Federal investigators also discovered something darker. The cartel had been using human trafficking and migrant smuggling as cover. Young people, often migrants desperate for passage to the United States, were passed through cartel facilities where they were housed in the same locations as drug shipments. Some were forced into labor. Some were coerced into carrying small amounts of drugs across borders themselves. The fragmented families, the broken children, the women found in trafficking safe houses, they were both victims and cover. Federal authorities would eventually identify over 200 individuals who had been trafficked through the Nevada operation, with at least 17 minors recovered alive during the raids. Judge Patricia Westlake, a federal judge appointed to oversee the preliminary hearings in the case, made a statement that would be quoted in law enforcement circles for years. "What we are witnessing is not merely the corruption of a state government. We are witnessing the deliberate infiltration and repurposing of legitimate state authority to serve organized crime. This is not negligence. This is engineered treason, and it will be prosecuted with the full force of federal law." But Project Meridian had never been limited to Nevada. As investigators dug deeper into the communication networks and financial flows, they discovered that Governor Thorne had been coordinating with similar operations in Arizona and California. The same shell corporations, the same pattern of corruption, the same redesign of law enforcement priorities to serve cartel logistics. In Phoenix, Arizona, a similar network of compromised law enforcement officials was discovered. In Los Angeles and San Diego, California, federal agents found evidence of cartel coordination with port authorities, allowing shipments to arrive with minimal inspection. The scale of the operation suddenly became clear. This was not a single state's problem. This was a regional infrastructure designed to move hundreds of tons of narcotics per week without triggering federal alerts. The operation had been designed with brilliant operational security. Shipping manifests were altered at the state level using access to government databases. Way stations on major trucking corridors were strategically shut down for equipment maintenance whenever cartel convoys passed through. Agricultural exemptions were used to move shipments without full inspection. Cryptocurrency transactions disguised the money flows. Charities and legitimate businesses laundered the proceeds. The financial forensics team calculated that Project Meridian was moving an estimated 300 tons of narcotics per month across the three-state region without triggering law enforcement response. 300 tons. Enough fentanyl to kill every person in Nevada 3 times over. Enough heroin to supply addiction for years. Enough cocaine and methamphetamine to destroy communities across the entire Southwest. Federal agents began arresting compromised officials in Arizona. A deputy chief of the Arizona Department of Public Safety. 3 federal border patrol supervisors. A federal judge in Arizona who had been dismissing cases against cartel members and accepting bribes disguised as consulting fees from shell corporations. In California, the investigation led to arrests of port officials, a Los Angeles Police Department captain, and a federal immigration official who had been facilitating the entry of cartel operatives into the country under false documentation. The scope of the conspiracy became so vast that federal authorities had to establish a special task force, the Meridian Corruption Task Force, just to process the evidence and coordinate prosecutions across 3 states. What struck investigators most powerfully was the human cost. The fentanyl that had been flowing through these networks didn't just disappear into supply chains. It reached neighborhoods. It reached families. It killed people. In Las Vegas alone, overdose deaths had tripled in the 5 years before the raids. Parents lost children. Children lost parents. Emergency rooms were overwhelmed. Community health centers saw addiction rising to epidemic proportions. And all of it was being facilitated by a state governor who had promised to protect his citizens. The federal prosecutors preparing the case against Governor Thorne obtained victim statements. A mother who lost her 19-year-old son to a fentanyl overdose. A father who watched his daughter spend 6 years struggling with addiction, cycling in and out of rehabilitation programs. A woman who had lost 3 siblings to opioid poisoning. These statements would be presented at trial, and they would form the emotional core of the government's case. Not just about drugs or money or corruption, but about the real human devastation that results when power is weaponized against the people it's supposed to protect. At a press conference, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Nevada made a statement. What we have uncovered is a deliberate, systematic attempt to replace legitimate state authority with a structure designed solely to facilitate drug trafficking. Governor Thorne did not merely accept bribes. He did not merely look the way. He actively redesigned state institutions to serve cartel interests. He converted the trust that citizens placed in their government into a weapon against them. This case represents one of the most serious breaches of public trust in American history, and we will prosecute it accordingly. In the months that followed, the full scope of the conspiracy continued to unfold. Federal authorities discovered that Thorne had been planning to expand the operation. Documents seized from his home outlined a 5-year plan to place additional cartel-connected individuals into key positions in county governments. There were plans to coordinate with sympathetic state legislators to pass laws that would further obstruct federal law enforcement operations. There were detailed proposals for creating a private security force, ostensibly for protecting state officials, that would actually serve as a cartel enforcement and protection apparatus. The plan was not merely to corrupt Nevada. It was to create a permanent, fortified state within a state, a place where the cartel's interests would be protected not just by secrecy or violence, but by the structure of legitimate government itself. It was a blueprint for what would happen if a cartel could simply purchase an entire state's law enforcement apparatus. But it never came to pass. Because on the night, federal agents moved. And they moved with overwhelming force and coordination. This story is a warning, not about drugs alone, not about organized crime alone, but about the fragility of institutions that depend on the integrity of the people within them. Power does not always require violence. Sometimes power only requires silence. It only requires ambition. It only requires the willingness of good people to make small compromises, to look away, to tell themselves that they are not responsible for things they choose not to see. The system in Nevada was rebuilt from the ground up. Every member of the state police command structure was reviewed. 63 officers were convicted of federal crimes and imprisoned. A federal monitor was placed in the state police to ensure operational oversight. Border crossing procedures were redesigned with federal oversight. The entire structure of law enforcement in Nevada was examined, reformed, and placed under external accountability measures. But the real cost was measured in different terms. In families destroyed. In children orphaned by overdose. In neighborhoods poisoned by narcotics. In the violation of public trust that takes years to repair, if it can be repaired at all. Governor Thorne was convicted on 47 federal charges, including money laundering, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, and honest services fraud. He was sentenced to 140 years in prison. He will die in federal custody. But that does not bring back the people who died from the drugs he helped distribute. It does not restore the trust that citizens had placed in their government. It does not undo the system he built. This is the story of Operation Phantom Shield. This is what happens when corruption reaches the highest levels of state government. This is what federal law enforcement discovered when they pulled back the curtain and saw what was really happening in Nevada. The system held. Barely, but it held. If you are still watching, you understand now how deep these networks can run. You understand how corruption can be engineered and systematized. You understand that institutions depend on the integrity of the people within them, and that the greatest threat to democracy is not external enemies, but the quiet compromise of those within our own government. This story is a fictional dramatization created for educational purposes about how organized crime operates and how law enforcement responds. All characters, agencies, locations, and events are entirely fictional. But the patterns it describes, the systematic infiltration of law enforcement, the redesign of government structures to serve criminal interests, the use of human trafficking and drug distribution as economic engines, these are real patterns that federal law enforcement fights against every day. Remember this story. Remember what it means when power is weaponized against the people it's supposed to protect.